in this. Oh, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be involved in this series of workshops, and it's always my uh, pleasure, really, to link up with creative entrepreneurs and people working in the creative sector. So, um, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm the president of COSTAT, which is the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts here in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a higher educational institution. We are probably third ranked in Trinidad after the University of West Indies, the University of Trinidad and Tobago. So, yeah, we're the third largest higher educational institution in Trinidad and Tobago. We offer a stronger focus on science, technology, and applied art, which is what our name says. And so, for example, we have a strong skills-based training agenda, which differs from that of UTT and UWI. So we're one of the few institutions of this type in the English-speaking Caribbean. So prior to coming back to Trinidad, because I'm a Trinidadian, Trinbagonian, as we say, citizen and long-time resident. I grew up here in Trinidad and Tobago, and I was working in St. Lucia prior to this. I was the principal and CEO of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. So I did that for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was in Paris, France at the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They have a development center there, which focuses on developing country issues. And so I was the senior economist in the Innovation and Economic Transformation Unit for a few months, well, almost 8 to 9 months. And prior to that, I was at UWI, University of West Indies, and multiple campuses. I've served in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Jamaica. So I've traveled all the key land-based campuses. Up until then, UWI has a campus in Antigua now, which is new, and they have an open campus, which is online. And for several years, almost more than a decade, I was the World Trade Organization chair at the University of West Indies. So I know and work a lot on trade policies. And so I've infused a lot of that into my work on creative industries. I'm the chairman of Caribbean Tales Worldwide Distribution, which is the largest distributor of Caribbean films. We run an incubator, which I was the co-founder of. We have several festivals in Toronto, in London, elsewhere, and we run incubators for filmmakers. So we've been doing that for almost 12 years now, actually. So it's been a while. So I've done many other things as well. So I won't bore you with all of those details. I don't know if that suffices as a introduction, Mariel. And I think I would have met Mariel when she first signed up for the Arts and Cultural Enterprise Management Program, which I was a co-founder of at UWI. And that was like 20 years ago, Mariel. Not to date us, but
it was a long time ago. I don't recall the exact, more than 10 years ago now.
Yeah, it was, yeah, more than 15.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've been in this business of training people in the creative sector for quite some time now. So I think that's a good enough introduction.
Absolutely. You can tell them where you were last Saturday when we were supposed to have the course, though.
Oh, I was in New York.
What?
At well, getting ready to go to participate in the UN Committee for Development Policy meetings. One of the members of that committee is an expert group committee. It's like a think tank on development issues. And in fact, I made a presentation on, what was the title of it? The digital creative economy, copyright, and digital industrialization. So yeah, but we work on major development issues. So for example, we're working a lot on developing innovation ecosystems that UN agencies and other agencies can help developing countries to do better. And we are working also on, work specifically on the graduation for least developed countries. So these are countries that are generally low-income countries with high levels of poverty and weak economic systems. So we work with these countries to strengthen their capacity and eventually graduate out of the least developed country category. So there are 54 countries that fall into that category, and about 15 of them are due to graduate in the next few years. So we're working on that. That's one of my other hats.
Thank you. Okay. I am translating in the chat, so this pace is perfect. Thank you.
All right, I won't go too fast then. Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right, so with that being said, maybe I'll put my thing on full screen and we could take it from there. Okay, I've chosen to entitle my presentation Financing and Funding Options for Creative Entrepreneurs. And it's under the broad title of, access to resources. Now, maybe I should state at the outset, in my experience, most creative entrepreneurs and most entrepreneurs, it doesn't matter what sector they work in, when you ask them, what do you need more than anything else? They will always say money. Yeah, I have not met an entrepreneur who says anything other than that. You ask them to rank their needs, and money will always be number one. But I can tell you that the biggest challenge associated with that is based on the question, can you generate a return on the money? Can you generate a return on investment? And so if you can't answer that adequately, then the real big issue that you're faced with is your capacity to understand the business that you are in. And from that standpoint, I would argue the biggest resource that early stage entrepreneurs need is not money as much as they need support and guidance in developing their business plan, business proposals, value proposition, you name it. And that's what makes the biggest difference. I can tell you from personal experience, setting up various creative industry firms over the years, that this is the most important and vital resource. If you could get that support with money, even better. All right, so I'm putting it up front that money by itself is not the solution. Because we know from the literature that 80–90% of firms who only receive money alone will fail within the first 2 to 3 years. Yeah, so the failure rate is very, very high. And so the way to address that particular problem is to provide this business coaching, business support for the first 3 years at a minimum, 2 to 3 years at a minimum, to get these firms over the hump, as we call it. So that being said, let's figure out how, if we are given some money, how we would access it, how we'd use it, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what my presentation is going to focus on. So I'll talk a bit about the creative industries, policy and financing landscape globally, and then in the region. And then I'll talk about some best practices in terms of financing for the creative industries and how entrepreneurs can tap into them. So the understanding the landscape, the mechanisms and the recommendations in the policy context is super important. And why do I say this? Creative industries are a little bit different from other industries. And that's something that both financiers need to take into account, as well as the entrepreneurs. So Marielle, when she was wearing the hat at the Caribbean Development Bank, one of the things that she did, which was very successful, I would argue, was to generate some training for financiers. So I was very much part of that particular initiative. And it was quite an experience of how would you train bankers and investors to invest in or provide funding for the creative industries. So I will talk a little bit about that as we proceed. So based on the work that I've done and what we see in literature.
Can you pause just a second so I can catch up?
So,
Thank you. Go ahead.
okay. So in this slide, what I'm going to do is talk about challenges and key recommendations. It's part of what we would call a strategic assessment of the financing funding issue for creative industries in the Caribbean. So the first key challenge is that access to finance is a critical challenge, but it is not a standalone issue. Okay, so that's the point I was making upfront, that we need to view financing not as a standalone issue. The second point, in most countries, only one or two types of financing are available. And I'll talk more about that, give you some examples from a study that was done, that I did more than 10 years ago, actually. But I would say that not much has changed since then. The third thing is that most financial institutions do not have a suitable framework for creative industry firms. So for example, they don't generally have flexible repayment frameworks that are suited to the creative industries. And the last key point is that the return on investment is perceived to be low relative to the risk. And by this, we mean that often people view creative industry investments as risky. That's like the principal perception in the finance and banking industry when it comes to creative industries. So if you are a young entrepreneur and you're going into a bank or a financial institution or an investor, the key question that you have to answer is how you're managing risk and how you are, in effect, de-risking the investment. If you can't answer that, you're probably not going to get any financing. All right, it's pretty straightforward. So why is the other slide, part of the slide not showing? Go back.
Okay, I'm catching up.
So the key recommendations.
Ooh, I wonder if something happened.
Let me go back and see. Get out of
I can.
how do I? All right, so
I could share it on
I
my.
can.
You got it.
Can we see it? Yeah.
You can see.
So okay, all right. So the key recommendations are improve access to finance should be twinned with access to market and market entry. All right, so this is my trade policy speak coming into play here. In trade policy, we talk about market access. Do you have access to the market? So can you sell your goods or services or your intellectual property in a particular marketplace? So for example, maybe there are restrictions on a particular format, or it's not technologically accessible in a particular location, or it's maybe too expensive to get into that particular market. So access to market is absolutely critical. And once you've maybe been granted access to the market, then the question that arises then is, can you make entry into the market? So I could give you a good example from the goods sector, a little bit harder from the creative industry. Okay, so for example, in some countries, there are restrictions or quotas on foreign content in the broadcast sector. So for example, in terms of music on radio or on television or in the movies, in terms of what quantum of content has to be sourced locally as opposed from foreign. So what that does is restrict access to producers from wherever, okay? Or there might be restrictions in terms of where the content can come from in some jurisdictions. So that's the issue of access to market. And then market entry is another issue. So even if you have access, generally for most industries, there are what we call industry gatekeepers. They are people or a small select group of firms who are the major intermediaries for a particular sector. So for example, my colleagues tell me, if you want to have a film shown in the United Kingdom in the cinemas or on television, or there are about 3 to 5 key brokers or film companies or distributors that you have to go through to get access to the mainstream markets. There are 3 to 5 major companies or distributors. If you don't have a good relationship with them, the likelihood of you getting into the market in the UK is pretty slim. Okay, so that would be a market entry issue. And then the next area is widening the finance options to include a whole range of things: startup financing, cluster financing, equity and debt financing, export financing, and then there's all kinds of new areas: intellectual property financing. You could finance your receivables. The list is long. So I will talk a bit about that as we proceed in some of the presentation. And then the third area is that you should seek out alternative and innovative financial instruments and repayment mechanisms to sustain investments. So what is meant by that is that normally when people think about financing, they think, well, maybe I need to get a loan, but right, or what we call credit financing is one of the most expensive modes of financing and the most difficult to repay. That shouldn't be your first port of call, let's to put it that way. Right? You should be thinking about alternative instruments and so on. So I did a study, which I have the link to in my next slide, where I looked at alternative and innovative financing mechanisms across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. So that study is available online. I did that back in 2016. And then the fourth area is that you need to strengthen the profitability of your company through business planning and access to business coaching. I can't begin to tell you how important those two things are. If you don't have a business plan, and if you don't have a business coach, your chances of success are a lot weaker. All right, so those are, if I was to make two key major recommendations, these are the two. Right? And I've done some work which Mariel facilitated on how to write a business plan, how to write a grant funding proposal, and those kinds of things. So I don't know if Mariel can give you all access to, well, the video and all of that stuff that I produced some years ago. So next slide. This is the study and this is the link. If I may dare say so, it's a pretty important piece of work. I haven't seen too many other studies of this sort. Lots of people talk about the creative industries and its importance, but there's so little work on the issue of financing and funding. So check this out. It's still pretty valid. I raised a key in the study. I have a section that talks about criteria for best practices and transferability. And it talks about these 4 key issue areas. Some of it I've alluded to already. And so I'm not going to spend any time on it now, given the time frame. But the key point, which is the last one I would want to argue, is that is the source of funding or financing sustainable? Can the company or the firm or the entrepreneur or the artist use the resources in a sustainable way? Meaning, can the firm sustain the investment? Is the key question. And can you, in effect, generate a return on the investment? That is the most important question to answer. And that is where the business planning and the business coaching comes into effect. I don't know if you can see this well enough. Maybe I need to go to full screen now. Let's see if it works. Yeah. Okay, so in the study that I did looking at the area, Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific, we identified 5 key areas of financing that was being deployed or being used in these various regions. So we identified a number of, I'm going to start at the top and then go around to the right. So startup financing and crowdfunding. So generally, you can argue that these are newer areas of financing and funding. So startup financing has become in vogue the last decade or more, particularly in creative sector firms, but also in other areas like relating to IT and technology and so on. And crowdfunding has become also a major area of growth for early stage companies. So they may put out an idea and do some crowdfunding. And I was just watching a video about Kanye West, that's his right name, yeah. Where for Super Bowl, he bought a $7 million time slot to advertise some new products that he's selling. And he sold everything at the same price. I think it was $17 for everything. T-shirts, shoes, bags, whatever, all brand name stuff. And he got like $17 million worth of sales. So he put in 7, got back 17, something like that, 17 or 19. And what the commentator explained is that he was also using that as a mechanism to assess what stuff people were interested in. And he hadn't produced any of it, right? So he used the sales online in a crowdfunding mechanism, saying that basically you order, then I will produce.
Mm.
He didn't risk any investment in production or in inventory. And I was like, damn, you might question his politics, but his business savvy, you have to give him some kudos. All right. So you can use crowdfunding as a mechanism because generally those consumers are patient. They're prepared to, wait maybe a month or 2 or a few weeks for the delivery of their product. They're not like Amazon customers who want it next day. Right? They understand that this is a crowdfunding mechanism. So crowdfunding is a very useful means to do a whole range of things beyond just funding. So it's not going to generate for you a lot of money, but what it can do is give you product testing and market testing, which is very expensive to do otherwise. Right? So I thought that was very, very clever. And then you have things like cluster and incubator funding, which can come in all kinds of forms. So for example, you could be part of a peer scheme, peer-to-peer scheme. So it's where firms at the same level are working together to collaboratively access finance, or it could be a cooperative, or you could be part of an incubator, and so on, right? So, and these things tend to be generally funded by donors who want to promote a particular sector, for example. And then you have different forms of equity financing. So this is where someone takes an equity share in your company. So venture capitalists, angel investors, as well as using, people can use their IP as a form of equity. So, so a venture capitalist, for example, would give a share, would contribute to the share of the company, make an investment in the company to a certain share, like 20%, 30%, 50%. And therefore will become basically a co-owner. So you are diluting your ownership in this process. Similarly, an angel investor tends to be less involved than a venture capitalist. So they are operating from a more arm's length position. So they'll put the money in, but not necessarily require to be as involved in the decision-making compared to a venture capitalist. And then you can use your intellectual property. So there's your catalog of film or music or paintings or whatever have intellectual property value. And if it does, can you use it as a form of equity in the business. That's an interesting area. Then you have debt financing, which is the traditional areas. So things like, taking a loan, as I indicated, tends to be very expensive. So in some countries, we've seen a number of African countries where they have loan guarantee schemes. So, for example, a development bank will provide a loan guarantee scheme so that commercial banks can lend to entrepreneurs at a concessionary rate. So in effect, what the development bank is doing, like a Caribbean Development Bank or the Jamaica Development Bank, or in Trinidad we have something called Exim Bank, which promotes trade and exports. What they can do is put aside some money that then what we would say collateralizes a fund that commercial banks can use. So the commercial banks have now, and this lending has now been de-risked. So several countries in West Africa have loan guarantee schemes. And that really is a very important area. We don't have any of that happening in the Caribbean as far as I recall. And then there are things like interest rate subsidies, concessionary financing, microfinance, IP as collateral, could collateralize a contract, you could get unsecured loans, what are called kicker types, and the list goes on and on and on and on, right? There's no shortage of debt financing mechanisms. You could mortgage a property, for example, and get financing, which is another traditional area. Again, tends to be quite expensive. So debt financing is what most people think of when they're talking about financing, but it tends to be the most expensive area of financing. And then there are things like export financing, export grants, export production rebates. So for example, the Exim Bank here in Trinidad and Tobago, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they had a export rebates scheme. So for example, if you were making a film and you gained a contract for the distribution of that film, you could get export financing or working capital financing up to about 60 to 80% of the value of the contract. So basically, you go to a distributor and you say, listen, I have this film, are you interested in distributing it? They say, yeah, I'll say about, I'm interested. And they give you a contract for, I don't know, let's say $500,000. You go by the Exim Bank, the Export and Import Bank, and you say, I have a contract for $500,000. Can you give me some working capital? Can you give me some export production rebates on it? And they're like, sure, 80%. Right? So basically what you do there is you sign over the earnings from your distribution contract to the Exim Bank, and in return, they give you this money to do the productions and make the export happen. And they've done that with fashion companies as well as film companies and so on. So that kind of financing tends to be more interesting for entrepreneurs because it has a built-in incentive to ensure that you deliver on the final product. And so they will be checking in on you and saying, well, so how far have you reached with your production? Are you having problems with the company on the other side? And then they would require, and I know this because in my early days, I used to work in a bank and I used to be engaged in things like what we call letters of credit. So for example, if you are exporting a fashion product, and I know of one example where a company from Trinidad was exporting to Colombia. Well, the company in Colombia that was going to be doing the importation and the purchasing of the fashion products from Trinidad and Tobago, they had to sign a letter of credit with their bank. That letter of credit then is transferred to the bank or the Exim Bank here in Trinidad and Tobago. And so it's now becomes a bank-to-bank arrangement for financing, and it's guaranteed through the two banks. And then the money is then loaned on to the entrepreneur here in Trinidad and Tobago. So letters of credit are another very established, very normal mechanism for export financing. And it doesn't just restrict it to the creative sector.
Antonis, can you go over letters of financing, please? Because it's a little challenging to keep up. It's so technical. And I'm sure the students would appreciate going over that as well.
Yeah. So, I will get into it a little bit more as we proceed.
Okay.
So don't worry. This is not the end of the line. So in the study, which you can access online, I gave examples of in each of the 5 areas of what was happening in certain parts of the Caribbean. So in Trinidad and Tobago, under startup and financing, the Film TT, which is a film company here in Trinidad and Tobago, which comes through Creative TT, which is part of the Ministry of Trade. They had audiovisual production grants. So you vie for, you put in your proposals, and to access the grant, they have a jury that assesses the proposals, and they give you a sum of money to engage or start your film production, right? Then there was a crowdfunding mechanism in Suriname called Apura Networks. I can't remember the details of it now, but it was one of the few examples of crowdfunding in the Caribbean at the time. And then under cluster and incubator funding, for example, at Compete Caribbean, which is funded through the IDB and several other international agencies, they had an animation cluster that they were financing. And then Caribbean Tales, which I was involved in as one of the co-founders, we had a financing mechanism with Flow, which was one of the largest telecoms operators in the Caribbean at the time, at least the English-speaking Caribbean. And so they provided funding to pilot certain film projects. And we did that for a few years, almost 4 to 5 years. And then equity financing, there was an angel financing network, I think, in Barbados. I don't know what's the status of that, but that was an example. And then you have the Caribbean Export Development Agency, which does some level of financing. Much of it is on a reimbursable basis, so you can get, to some extent, some level of financing, but you have to be able to, in some instances, show that you have financing of your own to put to it. So you have to put in like 40, 50%, sometimes 60%, and they will put in the rest. And then debt financing, the examples from Exim Bank, some of which I just gave as examples, but also export financing was also facilitated under the Exim Bank. And then you had like direct assistant grant schemes like from the Caribbean Export Development Agency. So these were just examples that I would have seen up till 2016. But since then, there have been a lot of different schemes. The problem, though, is that most of these financing mechanisms come and go. They disappear. They don't last very long in the Caribbean. And so we are constantly recreating ourselves and not generating growth as a result. So there's no stability in the financing mechanisms in the Caribbean. So that's a major, major issue. And this diagram is my attempt to explain how financing is part of an ecosystem. And really, the kind of financing that a firm needs depends on what stage they are at. Right? If you are a startup, then startup financing is probably your key area to go after. That's probably what you can only access. Startup financing, seed financing. But if you are already a firm that has some track record and you're part of a cluster now, or you're part of an incubator, then there's wider areas of financing that you can attract. But if you then go into an accelerator, so for example, here at COSTAT, we are doing what's called an upskilling academy for the circular economy. And we have, let's hold 1 second. Let me just take this call quickly. Yes, you can ask questions.
Well, Professor or Dr. Keith, I must say this lecture right here for me is actually very emotional, painful, and at the same time, it's extremely painful. Like it burned my soul. I almost want to cry. I think it's really good that
and what's your name? And what's your name? And where are you?
And I'm in Jamaica. And I have produced films before. I run an agency, and I've gone through that slide, majority of the financing areas that you have written. So I have gotten a grant from DBJ, that's Development Bank of Jamaica. I've gotten a grant from the Caribbean Export Agency in training. And I'm aware of like a lot of the things that you've put. And then I'm just sitting there like, but this makes no sense whatsoever, because the level that you have to do to succeed in this industry, in this region, although Trinidad seems to be better, I was on the same time I was looking at the Trinidad's film rebate policies, we were talking about it. It's absolutely ridiculous, because the entrepreneurial skills don't match to the level that they're requiring for us to finance or to figure things out. And then there was only 2 areas that I thought you had missed, that the #1 source of financing for most entrepreneurs in this area is self-finance and family money. And that's the truth. So that's the thing, that where if you're not able to get that, or get the the self-capital, or to start up, you don't usually get the chance to get to the other stages. And I don't see many businesses getting quite big in this area because of that. A good example, I had to do for the first time ever some sort of factor finance contract with the Bank of Jamaica, and it made me lose my mind. I said, what is this? Why are you guys making me do this? I do not know how to do this. And they were telling me, oh, if you don't do this, we won't get the contract or whatever. And as I looked at all the things that you were putting there, I felt, 1, overwhelming, and 2, the capacity for the entrepreneur to maybe deliver all these things might not be possible. And also the capacity of the organization, if he has one, if they're hiring, they might not have it. So there's a kind of mixed match between the requirements to get the financing and the entrepreneur's ability. So it's like chicken and egg. And then the thing with the cluster thing, because there's a cluster grant that's in Jamaica, which to date has never awarded anyone in the creative sector or technical sector. And I spoke to somebody, like I was saying, it's impossible, this cluster thing. And I think I spoke to someone who has gotten a grant. They said, Craig, they're able to get 3 to 4 companies really easy together, and they can list all their friends. But a lot of the people in the creative industry can't find 4 or 5 companies they can agree on something with, or even have that relationship. So it always feels like there's a disconnect between the way the finances are created and the actual lived experience of the entrepreneurs. And then the final line, when you said that the things are always changing, which is so true, that that upsets me like crazy, because if you're an entrepreneur who is trying to succeed in a world without capital, and then the rules are changing before there's a foundation, and then nothing is working. And I'll give you a real example for me that it burnt me. I applied for $200,000 from the Development Bank of Jamaica, a grant that I already got before for 4 million Jamaica, so that's 30,000 US. And they said to me, you know, I told them I want to build a Netflix studio in Jamaica. I said I have a film that Netflix actually reached out to me. One of the well, not Netflix direct, but a distributor for Netflix, that said they would like to transform a documentary I did on the First Lady of Jamaica, Beverly Manley, married to Michael Manley in the 1970s, that has already gotten 1 million views on YouTube, into a 11-part show. And I'm in conversations. I said I really need to build a studio. I said I had to I self-financed that film. I use the cameras I have. Netflix has a really high requirement of what type of cameras you need to have. And the sad part is I can't just send it to Netflix or sell it, because it wasn't built to stand up. So I need X money to do this. And these people at the DBJ, after they declined my thing, they told me that, Craig, it's not innovative enough because we're already making movies that are on Netflix. And I was looking at Netflix trying to find all the Jamaican films, which I could only find one. And I was just so bothered by that comment. And I said, what am I doing in a country? Now, just the other day, I have a film. It was just showed at Harvard. This is real, actually. It was been shown at Harvard. It's been shown at Cornell. It's been shown at Brandeis University. It was booked to show at UPenn. It's Amherst. All sorts of foreign colleges run by white people, and they're paying us money to bring it over there. But like in my own country, when I asked them to say they don't understand it, and then the people have come back to me later and said, Craig, the guy who was in charge, he just doesn't understand. And so, like, as you're talking, I'm really praying that maybe after this we can have something where we go around to all these sectors or industries who don't understand the things that you're showing, for them to be aware, because the pain that we feel in this business, if you're trying to make a living out of it, is absolutely ridiculous. It's high. It's very high.
I hear your pain, and I know your pain, right? Because I'm not just an academic. I've actually owned, run, and headed up and be chair of creative industries. So I know it firsthand. All that you've said there is absolutely true. And your story is not an isolated story. This is a normal story. And in fact, you've probably done better than most, if you can consider that, of the irony of all ironies. So you've had a range of learning experiences, which even most people in the creative industries have not had, in terms of going through some of these experiences with whether it's clusters or a development grant, or trying to convert a distribution contract into a financing mechanism to allow for, things like we call bridging finance or some other form of financing. You talked about factoring. All of these are, and that's the thing. Most people in the creative industries don't understand these areas of financing. So that's one side of the equation. And the other side of the equation is that our financing institutions in the Caribbean are very conservative. They make most of their money from consumer loans with high interest rate spreads. They also make most of their money from foreign exchange spreads. So as far as they're concerned, any of this other kind of financing, I'm talking about the commercial banks. I mean, like, why do that? Why? Because this is not very lucrative, and it has potentially high risk. So this is the world that we live in, right? It's not going to change anytime soon. Right? It's not going to change to suit the needs of creative entrepreneurs. So what do creative entrepreneurs do? You have to think more creatively and more innovatively about how you create financing opportunities and so on. You don't have a choice. It's tough, it's rough, but we didn't make this bed, but you gotta lie in it. Yeah, so that's why, you know, when several years ago, Mariel asked me to do this work on helping entrepreneurs design proposals or business plans, right? That was a really important, I think, area of training, because I can tell you that over 95% of the creative entrepreneurs that I've met over my 25 years in this business don't know how to write a proper business plan. All right. So, and in part, that's not your fault, because most creatives been trained to be creatives. They know how to make a film, write a book, develop a play, do choreography. That's what their training is all about. The thing is that in our ecosystem, we don't have people who've been trained to be artist managers, right? Or to be, what's the term we could use? Yeah, to do the business side of the creative industries, to be the booking agents and the this, that, and the other. That tends to be a very, very weak element of our ecosystem. And so it forces a lot of the creative industry entrepreneurs to have to learn these skills on their own. So that's why one of the terms that I use is creative entrepreneurship. And what I mean by that is that is a form of entrepreneurship that's adapted to the creative sector, where now you are forced to learn a whole range of skills. So for example, in your comments, one of the interesting things you talked about was how much hits you had on YouTube or whatever it was. So quantifying on providing the data analytics about your product, your service, or your intellectual property, right? Meaning, are you measuring your eyeballs? So eyeballs becomes now collateral. Okay. So, and that's in part what the Kanye West example illustrates as well, through the crowdfunding, crowd marketing mechanism that he's used, which is that he could now go to a potential investor and say, listen, you know, I got 50 million hits on my website after investing $7 million on Super Bowl. What does 50 million eyeballs convert into? That converts into a lot of investment capital. So, for example, well, I can't give you a specific example that relates to one of the jobs that I've been involved in. That would be not proper. But we were able to sell the idea based on the number of eyeballs that we were able to attract. And so you may have what we call a product to pilot something, or to be what we call a loss leader. So you don't make money on the thing, but the thing gives you eyeballs. And if it gives you eyeballs, then it means that you have an investable opportunity. And so you're leveraging that. So this is a new way of thinking about entrepreneurship and thinking about how you manage your operations. I'll give you an example, but not an example, but how I started to unlearn and and unthink my understanding of economics. I bought a book called Wiki Economics more than 10 years ago. When I first read the first few chapters, I said to myself, this is crazy. I don't understand what they're talking about. This is crap. A couple years later, I went back and I read the book again. I'm like, wow. This is the new real world. So, if you've been taught economics like I was 30, 40 years ago, that really dates me. Yeah. Most of what I was taught has very little relevance in the contemporary context. Most of our institutions are premised on the old model of financing and how an economy works, not on the new. So if you understand these things, then if you understand the context, and that's why I'm spending the time focusing on the context first, rather than diving straight into the instruments. If you understand the context, then, or the terrain in which you're operating, then you know how you have to adapt. The world doesn't adapt to you, unfortunately. Well, it couldn't, because there are too many different scenarios that we're all operating in. So this is why this kind of course is super important. Now you can get this mental picture of what the terrain looks like, and you can say, all right, for this leg of my journey, I need running shoes. Then I reach the hills, then I need hiking boots. And if there's snow on the other side, then I need snow boots. Yeah? Right? So I know this is a long response to your comment or query, but I really want to thank you for that, because
That's correct. I would say
I've
been to court too. I've been to court with employees in the labor board, labor law, 2 years. I've been audited. That example about the shoes and the boots and the whatever, anyone who's actually deciding to run a business and to make money in this field, you will have to learn how to do a lot of things yourself, because the capital is not as readily available. The expertise is not as readily available in terms of who you can employ, because it's not like a bank where you start a new bank. You can just take other bank employees who understand the law. You're talking about an industry that isn't fully formed in most of the Caribbean countries, and you're translating other skills from other places to go in there. And then, as you said about the system, most of the laws, economics, whatever, they were written before these things existed. A good example, up until 2022 in Jamaica, we had an export tax of $20 per parcel that left. It was built in 1970 when Jamaica was coming out of, post-colonial ideas. We were saying, oh, wow, we need to make sure that the value of the money that is created in Jamaica stays in Jamaica. So when we ship out a container of bananas or aluminum, we're going to charge them $20. So that stays in the government. But that stopped. I can't even tell you how many small entrepreneurs who would have sent out jewelry or sent out this, because that tax was there, $20 export tax. And because nobody ever became rich enough or successful enough because of taxes like that, the government didn't even know it was there until somebody who was, of a, let's say, a government minister's daughter who was running her own business. She was the one that told the minister. And in a country of 2.7 million people, a law was affecting so many businesses across different political spectrums or parties. And there are so many laws like that I come up on a day-to-day basis that just makes me get so crazed and unhappy, because as you're saying, like, I even one time I spoke to the Minister of Finance, this was just 2 weeks ago, Minister of Planning, I said to them, you have no idea what it's like to be a medium business in this field, because you don't interview us, you don't talk to us. And we're playing in the space where the laws haven't reached. So you're changing everything for micro, and the big people can come in. But for us who are just, at the whims of what I call the machinations of the post-colonial state in 1960, that never imagined, in my opinion, a Black person to have a business, who was just trying to do things. All those laws that they've created to protect ourselves from the evil big businesses are holding us back so much, which I could go on forever about. But what you're showing me here is very useful. And I think everyone in this room needs to know it, because guys, if you're trying to make money in this country, any of these countries, you really have to know this stuff. And it can be stressful, but you have to learn how to write a grant. You have to learn to write this. And in my business, and I have a lot of people that work there, nobody has ever left my business, started their own business and been successful because they don't know any of these things, because they think it's just creativity. Oh, I'm creative. It doesn't work that way. You have to know how to bring in the goods and the equipment. You need to know how to write invoices, finance, sell, get money. This is so important.
Thank you so much, Craig. We have a question from Sophie in the chat.
Okay, sure.
She said that she knows artists should be business savvy to a degree, but should the main focus primarily be training artists to be entrepreneurs, or should we be training people who are business savvy to work with artists and form partnerships?
And the answer is, it's not mutually exclusive, right? Yeah, right. So let me give you an example. So there's a company in Cayman Islands that sells rum cake. And the guy, you know, he's originally from Jamaica, and he knows about how to make cake really well. And he hired a young graduate out of Barbados from the business school who came and helped him build the business. They're the largest merchandise exporter from Cayman Islands. The biggest merchandise export from Cayman Islands is rum cake. And every day they get on that island about 15 to 20,000 new customers called cruise ship passengers. And every day they get about 2,000 people or more passing through their shop on a guided tour on how rum cake is made. And out of those 2,000 people, about half of them buy cake, right? And in my case, because I interviewed the guy, and at the end of my interview, he says, would you like to buy some cake? And I said, well, I don't want it for me. I said, I will send it to my mother-in-law, who lived in the UK at the time. He says, no problem, man. So I swiped my credit card. And the following day, I flew back to Trinidad through Miami, so I had to overnight in Miami. When I get back to Trinidad, my mother-in-law calls me and says, thank you very much. And I said, thank you for what? And she said, well, didn't you send me cake? And I said, how did the cake get to you so fast from Cayman Islands? So I called the guy in Cayman Islands and asked him, how can you deliver cake from Cayman Islands to the UK in under 2 days? He says, because I have a fulfillment center in Miami and one in London. And as soon as you swiped your credit card, there's 2-day delivery in the UK by mail, very cheap. Boom. Well, you could do that with cake, with rum cake, because rum cake don't spoil. Right? So he has a facility in 2 locations to serve the North American market and the European market, where there's cheap internal distribution. Right? He uses the regular post office in the UK. Okay, so you have to think creatively, right? Our economies, as Craig has described it, our economies are not designed to facilitate young startup entrepreneurs. It is not. For all the reasons that you said, and I could give you even more reasons. Okay, so what? Yeah, so what? What are you going to do about it? All right, you could lobby, and we need to be better organized to do that. Lobby, advocate, and so on. But in the meanwhile, you have to feed your children, put bread on the table, and make a living. So now what we have found, and this is a study I did back in 2012, and I can tell you that it probably hasn't changed much. Most people are accessing their own resources, more often not through their families. I think you said that, Craig. Then reinvestment, meaning some of the surplus you generate from your business goes back into the business, tends to be the second most important source of financing. Then loans, which is very expensive, right? But loan financing tends to be the third most important area. followed by grant financing, meaning that you access a grant from the Jamaica Development Bank or the Belize Development Bank or whichever. And then you have like new investors. So once your company is successful, people are coming with equity investments. And this shows you the distribution for different countries in the region. Probably hasn't changed much, right? I'm sure if you go in other territories like Guyana or Suriname or Belize or Bahamas, you'd see a similar pattern. So where does this leave us? So I want to talk a bit more now about, so how do we proceed? So in the work that I've done, I argue that firms, creative industry firms, fall into three categories. And these are people who, I'm not talking about somebody who is now starting out, who has just an idea. I'm talking about somebody who's already produced something and has had some level of sales, right? And at one end, you can say a firm is a startup ready firm. This is an early stage entrepreneur venturing into a new market with new products, new services, et cetera, et cetera. Then the second area is a finance ready firm. This is a firm that has a track record, so you could show that both proof of concept, but also proof of market, right? Saying, I have sold this much in this market over the last 3 to 5 years, let's say. And it's been fairly stable and it's been growing. This is a finance-ready firm. Okay, so a bank or even a development bank would look at a firm like that because you have maybe your accounting records, and they could say, okay, this is a safe bet. We could invest in you. And then you have an export-ready firm, which is a firm that has been able to have a track record going out to regional, international, and even diasporic markets. And this is a firm that can access even wider forms of financing. All right. So my key question to you, this audience, is what type of firm are you? And secondly, what kind of financing is appropriate for your stage of development? So depending on where you are in this scheme of things, there's a different kind of financing that you would probably be able to access as opposed to another form of financing. All right, so let me give you some examples. So for a startup ready firm, that's an early stage entrepreneur, the rationale you would give for financing. So if you go to a bank or development bank or some other entity, like a Caribbean Development Bank, they might have a grant. The rationale you would give is you want to launch a new product line, you need to invest in new technology. So Craig gave the example of wanting to build like a Netflix equivalent studio or a Netflix compatible studio.
Yeah, just the production house, like just to increase the quality of the cameras, the background, you know, that type of set stuff.
Yeah, right. Expand your distribution network. And in effect, in summary, what you're doing is creating a runway to investor readiness. Okay, so you want to access financing mechanisms that are not going to be expensive, but will provide you with the seed financing to get up and running, right? So grant funding, seed financing, crowdfunding, microcredit financing. These are all key mechanisms that can get you out of the blocks and you start running, okay? And you start developing a proof of concept, a proof of market. In effect, making yourself investor ready and ready for the next phase. So the next phase is what we call a finance ready firm. And this is really an established firm or firms with a track record. So you know how someone track record, you've been selling both in the domestic market, maybe you've been selling to tourists in your home market, which could be almost defined as an export, and maybe regional markets. And so your ask now is different. What you're looking for is working capital, supply chain financing, cash flow solutions, capital investments, and things like follow-on financing, which could include things like bridging financing and those kinds of things. So like in the film industry, there's something called bridging financing. It's a clearly defined concept. All right. And so some of the financing mechanisms could include venture capital, angel investing, using your intellectual property as equity if you have a product or service that can have identifiable IP elements. And then there are things like unsecured loans, like kicker type and so on. So the list here could be longer, but I didn't want to overawe you just yet with that. But the third area is where you start to see a bigger range of financing. So this is the third area, a export-ready firm. This is a firm with a track record in regional, international, and diasporic markets. And so your rationale here that you would go to the bank or other institutions with an ask is focused on export and trade financing a trade mission, using your receivables. So this is a company that is very provided you with a contract saying that they will buy this much stuff from you, like a distributor. And so you could use your receivables and have it valued as a basis for lending. Same thing with your intellectual property. And then you could have things like bridging finance and so on. So some of the mechanisms I've identified here include things like export grants, duty-free imports on equipment and supplies. So it's not just how much money you can get from an investor, it's how much money can you save on, for example, critical imports. Because now maybe the government identifies not just you, but the sector as a sector that should be granted some concessions, duty-free imports, for example. And then there's concessionary and reimbursable financing, which you find with, for example, Caribbean export. Many of the firms have found that really problematic because sometimes you have to put up a lot of the financing yourself. So often it's only the firms that are already in the export business that have the capacity to do that. And then things like trade fair support, really important because going to trade fairs is a really important means of widening your market, getting people to know you. And I can tell you, I've gone to many trade fairs and for year after year, as an academic, to view what's happening. And the firms from the Caribbean that are able to go consistently, then the buyer firms or the distributors say, okay, after they've seen you a few years, it looks like you're going to stick around. It looks like you have the capacity to deliver. And so they have a sense of comfort that you are not a fly-by-night operation. And this is really important. So a lot of times we talk about money, but money by itself is not the solution, I'm arguing, right? So I can tell you that showing up at a trade fair is a really important thing. You learn a lot, but you also build a network. And then there are things like letters of credit, a line of credit, which I described earlier, which is standard banking finance if you are exporting something to another country. The banks have this sorted out. This has been in operation for hundreds of years now. And then things like invoice factoring, which Craig mentioned. And then there's things like IP collateralization and so on. The other modes of financing. So let me give you two examples. Are you able to produce something that a company would want like if you're in the film business and you're able to have product placement. So in your film, somebody is drinking a can of soda or rum or beer, and the label is easily identifiable, and you get the company to give you some financing for the film for that purpose. Or you could be shooting a shot where somebody's jumping in a plane, yeah, and the airline gives you some money, right? So in the film industry, product placement is a funding mechanism. And then you can have, let's call it public-private financing mechanisms. So for example, you have a film, or maybe you have a song that celebrates your particular destination, so that facilitates what we call destination branding. And so the tourism agency puts some money behind your production. Maybe in your film, you have nice drone shots of the island, or you are celebrating the country's history or particular historical character or personality. And so you're feeding into what we call destination branding. So destination branding is then a mechanism that you can then pitch to a tourism company and say, can you finance this project or be partial financier?
I
Right,
would
so
say, Dr. Keith, I got that done. I got the company to give me about $6,000 to basically be in some videos. They were a private charter company for luxury travel. And I did a conference and I told them, hey, can, sponsor the conference. And what they did for us was they put a yacht party together for all the guests and chartered a boat and took all the journalists from Latin America for us in return for the press feature. And that was a very nice action. I also wrote to the government and got the Minister of Tourism to come, and they supported it and supposedly sponsored, but they didn't actually pay. So I ended up having to pay. So the next thing I would say, anytime that government promise you anything, just make sure it's in a contract, because the government can tell us things and they'll say, yeah, man, they're doing this. And they will literally, as my experience, on the last day when the bill is supposed to be paid, tell you that they can't do it. And that's really painful. But outside of that, there's one thing that I don't see that's really useful. I have used it a lot. There is a financing in Jamaica that's available, which is basically labor financing. We have a program called From the Heart, which is like the workers training program. And basically they give us $38,000 per person that you hire, who has gone to the Heart Institute, or 40, I think it's 46,000 Jamaican, so call it like 300 US per person, who has recently graduated from university. So it's a graduate work experience program, and it lasts for 6 months. The program is supposed to get people who are young to have real internships and make a stipend. But what we've done, we said, oh, this program exists. We wrote to them and said, can we just hire our people fresh from university and you pay the stipend directly to them? And they said yes. So we don't have to actually choose from their pool. We can just hire a regular process. And that has added up to a lot of money over time. And most entrepreneurs I speak to in Jamaica don't know about that thing. And I'm sure that there are other programs like that where the government is trying to put people to work. And you can just say, okay, I have a company, and you can put there. And then I think the more advanced thing, which I don't understand, in Jamaica, I saw it recently, that in the labor law policy with film, they actually have some sort of rebate on some of the taxes that we pay to our employees. That's very complicated though. I've never claimed it, and I don't think anyone in my office would ever understand it, and I'd have to stay up all night to look at it. But I know that exists. So outside of these things, I know that there is one thing that is usually very easy, the graduate work experience program, or like if you have a labor institute or something, they're very eager to place people to work, and you can write to them and say, hey, I have a company, can you give me a stipend per worker? And that usually works. And then maybe there's some sort of rebate on the taxes you pay for your employees.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. In Trinidad, there's something called OJT, on the job training, right, for graduates and so on, and particularly young people. So it's a similar scheme to the one you've just described. So you're right. The financing mechanisms are not just your standard ones, which most people think of, right? So the main purpose of my presentation is to say, hey, there's a whole financing universe out there You have to learn how to think creatively about how you access it. Okay? And you need to do some homework. And it's obviously you've done some homework. So thanks very much for sharing those examples with us, Craig, because it makes it's one thing for me to say it. But it's another thing for, you guys who've had the lived experience to share those examples. So thank you very much. Anybody else wants to say anything? I know we should be wrapping up soon. Any other comments, queries? I'm at your disposal. And I'm sure if Mariel thinks it fits, she will invite me to come back again and share some other ideas if I have the time. I'll make the time.
So we will be having on April 13th and April 20th a networking session where we're hoping to introduce all our participants to a range of experts across the region and in Africa and other places. So Dr. Nurse, we hope that you can be there for that experience when our participants will hopefully be pitching their ideas with a little bit more clarity. I do see that Jonathan has a question. Jonathan?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I hope y'all can hear me.
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nurse, for the explanation on financing and the type of financing there are for businesses. I got a lot of clarity on that concept. I also heard you talking about Apura networks that was based in our country. But I have to say that they stopped that. I was also very close with the director of Apura, and they changed actually their business direction because the crowdfunding part, especially in our country, is based a lot of in trust, and people didn't really trust the crowdfunding or didn't want to put their money into something they didn't understand. So that slowly died. And I immediately thought about what you said about the return, because that is what an investor mostly, especially angel investors, mostly look at is what is the return that you can give me based on the investment I will do in the business. And most of, especially small businesses, need to create a proof of concept to be able to show to those investors that I've done it with let's say $10,000. I've been able to generate $200,000, and I need 1 million to generate let's say 20-30 million. And those numbers might be interesting for the investors to look at because of the proof of concept you already did. So I think about the situation of Greg. It's really complicated in his country, Jamaica, especially in that industry of film, because I think the main burden is how it's maybe a question towards Greg is how do you prove that that investment will guarantee a return, especially with the example you gave of the Netflix studio. I'm curious as to what the investment was and what the return on investment would be if let's say it was invested in your project.
So I think the main problem in Jamaica and other Caribbean islands, except for Dominican Republic, is that there is no real example of what true success looks like in our industry. And then so some of the historical numbers that other countries would have access to, we don't have. We have to make guesses based off what you see in the US. And then the people who are in charge of these policies and the banks, some as Dr. Keith said, some of them are older, but they might not even be in the world that we're in, meaning they might not be watching Netflix, they might not be watching film, they might not be actually even participating in the things that we're selling. And a good example is, you know, I got $10,000 originally from investment from my dad. That's what started this business. $10,000. at least 400,000 US in 1 year in revenue. That's probably last year. So I think the highest I've done is 90 million Jamaican, which is maybe 600,000 in revenue. When I had to get that 10,000 US, the only reason I got it was because I'm his son. He didn't understand anything I was talking about. The first 2,000 he gave me, which was to buy a camera, he was like, why am I want a camera? That don't make no sense. What's wrong with you? And he was trying to get me to buy the cheapest. So he, as my own father, did not understand anything I was doing. He only gave me the money because I am his son. Now, what Dr. Keith explained about that thing with the bank financing, the bank called me the other day and said to me, hey, Craig, you know, you put I think it was like $70 million to our accounts last year. That's your cash flow. That's how much cash has come through. We're willing to qualify for a loan. The only reason why they're willing to qualify me is not because they understand what I'm doing, it's because they can see the money. And the problem is in our country, that's how it's going to work. Because remember, majority of the people that I think are in our places that got rich, wealthy before, a lot of them are people who either export food and food stuff, they're finance people, or they are just importers who buy and sell things. So this idea of creating something that's creative, that has value, that's not what they know. And you're talking to a group of people that don't understand this thing. So a good example, I wanted 200,000 US for the Netflix thing just to have the equipment. I do not know what it would return. But we pivoted and we've been selling our experience called Out There Without Fear to universities overseas, which I was talking about Harvard, Cornell, Amherst, and we charge about 6,000 US dollars to go up there and we do a little experience. They watch the film and they also we fly up a dance hall instructor with us to dance and they teach them dance. Like at Harvard, we had 70 students of all races dancing and learning and watching this film. The government would not be able to understand what we're doing. Now, when we show them a video and say, look at Harvard, they would say, oh my God, wow. But the amount of work it took to get to that stage and rejections, cold emails, all these things that you have to do, it's not something that they can understand. And so like, I'm only saying this to say, like, in our country, in my opinion, I think it's more about reputation. And then, yes, you have to have a finance, it's about people have to believe in you specifically. They might not understand what you do. And it has to be more on the character of like, oh, I know this person. Like, I see you, Jonathan. Jonathan's out there. Jonathan's a well-respected person. Oh, we can give Jonathan money. That's basically it. Because otherwise, and you have to, I think the best example, a very wealthy person in Jamaica, when I asked him to invest in something that I was doing, that was going to help people, he said to me, Craig, it's a great idea, but you have to plant the seed and spend your own money to grow it and water it. He said he would not water it, not even a little bit, entirely that. And he says, when it grow and a tree is big, he will come sit in the shade and pretend that he was there. So that is what it's like in our country. You understand? Like you have to go grow the plant itself, plant it, go in there, do all the work, and then as soon as it get big, everyone will come and say, yeah, I was there in the beginning and did it, and then they'll start throwing everything at you. But if you think that you're gonna get something otherwise, no, wrong industry. You need to go into like finance or something where people already know that makes money and they'll throw cash at you. But this film thing, I think that majority of people underestimate the amount of work it takes because you have to learn how to be not only a creative person, but as Dr. Key said, a creative entrepreneur. And you have to also learn government laws. You have to learn political directorate stuff. You have to learn labor laws. I mean, that was my question to you after this. Like, what about industrial policy for the labor in this industry? Because that's my biggest problem. Like, I don't think the government understands how this field works. And my experience in the labor board has made me quite depressed because I've had to spend so much time in court on one mistake of an employee and spent so much money. So that was my question to you. But I hope that answers, Jonathan. That is just hard, and you have to basically have a reputation. And then, yes, you need to have financing, but it's going to be self-financed first. And then hopefully you get grants, and the grants that basically are not necessarily focused on creative stuff, but are general and small. I think those are easier to get. And then to just basically look at all the financing opportunities in the small ways and get that. And then separately, good advice is go to your bank, introduce yourself to them. And if you have an office, bring them down to your office and try to explain them what to do. So build a personal relationship with your banker, which I've done. So you go to the bank and say, yo, listen, I do this. Like you can't just expect to write to them. You have to tell them, this is what I do, show them contracts, like literally explain to them, this is what it is. And it's hard to understand. but this is what I need, and then they'll be open to it. And then also write articles and TV stuff. Just do everything to put your name out there, because it's the country in Jamaica, I think, is follow fashion. So if you look successful, then maybe people will come and give stuff to you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are coming to our closing time. It is getting pretty late, and we want to respect everyone's time, especially Dr. Nurse. Dr. Nurse, we are absolutely delighted that you could speak with us this evening. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. We do want to say as well that, one of the reasons that we're having this is to provide you with the information, but also to provide you with a network of support, because clustering is really, really important in terms of advocacy, in terms of building your credibility, in terms of supporting one another. So there are multiple ways in which you can use the networks that we are trying to build here to further your impact and your success in this work. That said, it is almost 8:15, and we do want to continue these conversations, and we can continue them in smaller groups as well. So thank you, Dr. Nurse, and thank you to all of our participants who have joined us this evening. We hope that this has been beneficial, and we look forward to continuing this journey with you all. We have sessions tomorrow and Friday and Saturday. So a lot more to come. Thank you again. And Dr. Nurse, I will be speaking with you soon. Thank you.
Okay, pleasure. Okay, bye guys. All the best. And you could always contact me through Marielle or through my email, which is on this first slide, I think. It's keithnurse@me.com. So be good.
Bye.
All the best.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.